I thought I could turn pro and get my card when I was about a sophomore in college. But to actually make a living and be successful at it, probably when I was about 30 years old. So a big gap. I tend to have one thought, which is basically stay centered and be balanced and try to just pick a target and hit at it. I try not to do anything special. I don't try to hit it left to right or right to left. I try to just pick out a target and hit right at it.
At 66, Tom Lehman finally admits the truth about the 6 golfers he hates, and the first name proves the man of God image was always a lie. It all started with one putt that exposed everything wrong with his leadership, his pride, and his refusal to accept blame. What happened next destroyed friendships, ended careers, and turned golf's most devout Christian into the sport's most controversial lightning rod. 1999, Brookline Country Club, the Ryder Cup hanging in the balance. Justin Leonard sinks a 45-foot putt on the 17th green, and Tom Lehman loses his mind. He's sprinting across the green, fist-pumping, screaming, celebrating like he just won the lottery. There's just one problem. José María Olazábal hasn't putted yet. The hole isn't over, but Lehman doesn't care. He's trampling the green with teammates and caddies, turning professional golf into a fraternity party. Olazábal stands there, stunned, watching Americans invade his putting line, and the world watches Tom Lehman reveal who he really is. Sam Torrance saw it all. Europe's vice captain couldn't believe his eyes. This was Tom Lehman, the man who talked about faith and values and doing things the right way. The same man now acting like a teenager at a rock concert. Torrance didn't hold back. He called it the most disgusting scene he'd ever witnessed in professional golf. He didn't stop there. Torrance went nuclear with one sentence that exposed Lehman's entire persona as fraudulent. Tom Lehman may call himself a man of God, but his behavior was disgraceful. The hypocrisy was stunning. Lehman spent years building this image as golf's moral compass, and Torrance just shattered it in one brutal quote. The feud exploded from there. Torrance didn't let it go. Years later in his autobiography, he was still furious. He called it the most disgraceful and disgusting day in professional golf history, singled out Lehman again, writing that he and other Americans acted like madmen. Lehman eventually apologized privately to Torrance, but publicly, he defended himself. He claimed it was just patriotic passion. He refused to admit he crossed the line. That stubbornness became his pattern. Every time someone called him out, Lehman doubled down. He protected his ego instead of accepting responsibility. The reconciliation with Torrance took years, and even then, the damage was permanent. Lehman's reputation as a gentleman was gone. Torrance made sure of that. The relationship between Torrance and Lehman became so toxic that it infected future Ryder Cups. When Torrance became Europe's captain in 2002, the mere possibility of Lehman being on the American team created problems. Media on both sides questioned whether the two could be professional. Sponsors worried about the optics. Golf fans debated whether old wounds would reopen. The feud had grown beyond the two men. It became a symbol of everything wrong with modern Ryder Cup culture. The intense nationalism, the personal attacks, inability to separate competition from genuine animosity. Lehman and Torrance personified this ugliness, and neither seemed willing to step back and acknowledge their role in creating it. But Torrance wasn't alone. Mark James, Europe's captain in 1999, had an even worse view of Lehman. James didn't just see one bad moment. He watched Lehman whip up the Boston crowd all week. He saw Lehman feeding into the hostile atmosphere that made Brookline infamous. In James's mind, Lehman wasn't just a participant. He was the head hooligan. James wrote a book called Into the Bear Pit. He made Lehman the villain. James accused him of egging on fans, creating chaos, and turning the Ryder Cup into a disaster. He blamed Lehman for inciting the entire mess. Before we continue, did Tom Lehman cross the line at Brookline, or was it just passion? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more golf stories that expose the truth behind the legends, hit that subscribe button right now. Lehman was offended by James's book, but he didn't apologize. He called it a natural display of patriotism. He said he wouldn't say sorry for being excited. Then he went on the attack. He accused James of mudraking. He implied Europeans were being holier than thou about the whole thing. He called them sanctimonious. The arrogance was incredible. Instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, he went too far, Lehman turned it around and blamed the people calling him out. That's not leadership. That's pride refusing to admit fault. The feud got so bad that it affected European team politics. James eventually had to resign from a Ryder Cup vice captaincy because the controversy wouldn't die. And Lehman, he claimed the Europeans lost the moral high ground with their constant complaining. He actually tried to make himself the victim. He turned his own misconduct into a story about European hypocrisy. That takes a special kind of stubbornness. The feud with James never really ended. It just faded into bitter silence, with both men convinced they were right. James's book tour became a platform for attacking Lehman specifically. In interview after interview, James returned to the same theme. Lehman was the problem. Lehman led the charge. Lehman set the tone for American misconduct. The repetition was deliberate. James wanted to cement Lehman's role as the villain of Brookline in public memory, and it worked. Years later, when people discussed that Ryder Cup, Lehman's name came up first. Not the team, not the crowd, Tom Lehman personally. That's the power of a sustained media campaign by someone with credibility and a platform. Then there's José María Olazábal, the man Lehman and his teammates disrespected most directly. Olazábal wasn't trying to start a feud. He was just trying to make a putt, but Lehman's celebration stole that from him. The green invasion happened before Olazábal could even attempt his tying putt. American players and caddies were everywhere.
Olazábal stood there, helpless, watching his moment get destroyed. After it was over, he spoke carefully but firmly. That was no way to behave. I call for respect from fellow professionals to make sure it doesn't happen again. Those words were aimed directly at Lehman. Olazábal didn't write angry books or give furious interviews. He didn't need to. His quiet disappointment was more damaging than any public attack could have been. Many in Europe viewed Lehman as embodying the worst of American excess in that moment. The unsportsmanlike scene became a stain on Lehman's reputation for years. To his credit, Lehman eventually expressed regret for the overexuberance. He and Olazábal later made peace. They reconciled and even exchanged friendly notes. But the Battle of Brookline left a lasting mark on both men's careers. For Lehman, it meant his name would forever be associated with one of golf's most embarrassing moments. The Spanish legend's grace in handling the situation only made Lehman's actions look worse by comparison. What makes the Olazábal situation particularly damaging is that it wasn't about trash talk or media feuds. It was about basic respect between competitors. Lehman violated one of golf's most sacred unwritten rules. You never interfere with another player's shot. You never celebrate before the competition is over. You never trample someone else's line. These aren't complicated concepts. They're Golf 101. Yet Lehman, in his patriotic fervor, forgot all of them. Or worse, he knew the rules and chose to ignore them. That's what Europeans couldn't forgive. It wasn't just poor sportsmanship. It was a calculated decision to prioritize American celebration over professional courtesy. The image of Olazábal standing alone while chaos erupted around him became iconic. It was replayed on sports networks for years. It appeared in documentaries about Ryder Cup controversies. It became shorthand for everything that can go wrong when competition turns into something uglier. And at the center of that image, leading the charge across the green, was Tom Lehman. His face twisted in celebration, his arms raised in triumph, completely oblivious to the fact that he was destroying not just Olazábal's moment, but his own legacy. That freeze frame became Lehman's defining image, overshadowing his Open Championship victory and his years of solid play on tour. The Brookline disaster didn't just cost Lehman friendships with Europeans. It cost him opportunities with his own countrymen. In 2001, Curtis Strange became U.S. Ryder Cup captain, and he had to make wildcard picks for the 2002 team. Lehman was a Ryder Cup hero with past heroics. He expected the call. It never came. Strange shockingly snubbed him. Lehman believed it wasn't about his play. He thought Strange feared his presence would rekindle Brookline tensions. He was convinced he'd become a potential flashpoint with the Europeans. Sam Torrance was now Europe's captain. Having Lehman on, the team at the Belfry could provoke European anger all over again.
Strange denied this publicly. He claimed the bottom line was that Lehman just hadn't played very well. He said he was doing what's best for the team. He insisted it wasn't about any individual. But privately, Lehman felt betrayed by a fellow American. He suspected Strange wanted to avoid controversy at all costs, even if it meant benching a veteran. Lehman spoke out about it. He lamented that his patriotism had made him a liability in the eyes of some. The two never had a screaming match, but there was clear frost between them. Strange's decision and his failure to acknowledge Lehman's feelings about it caused a professional rift. For Lehman, this was proof that Brookline had turned him into damaged goods, even in American eyes. The Strange snub revealed something crucial about Lehman's situation. He'd become toxic not because of his golf skills, but because of his reputation. Strange, a fellow competitor who understood the pressures of Ryder Cup play, still couldn't bring himself to pick Lehman. That speaks volumes. Strange knew the Europeans would react badly. He knew the media would rehash Brookline endlessly.
He knew Lehman's presence would create distractions, so he made the cold calculation to leave him home. For Lehman, a man who'd given everything to Team USA, this rejection stung worse than any European criticism. It meant his own side viewed him as a problem. The reality was brutal. Lehman had become so controversial that even picking him for the team roster would dominate headlines and overshadow actual golf. What made the strange situation particularly painful was the way it unfolded publicly. Lehman had to watch other players get selected while his name never came up. He had to answer questions from reporters about why he thought he was left off. He had to maintain dignity while feeling humiliated. And through it all, Strange never gave him the courtesy of a real explanation, just corporate speak about form and team needs. Lehman knew better. He understood the unspoken message. You're too much trouble. We don't want to deal with the baggage you bring. That kind of rejection from your own country cuts deeper than any foreign criticism ever could. But Lehman's feuds weren't limited to Ryder Cup politics. In 2006, when Lehman was Team USA captain, he clashed with someone completely unexpected, Rory Sabatini, a fiery South African golfer who wasn't even part of the Ryder Cup universe. Sabatini had a reputation for blunt, often disrespectful comments. That year, he decided to share his opinion about Lehman's team. Sabatini said the US squad was beatable and lacked team chemistry. He essentially taunted that Lehman's group didn't gel and could be easily defeated. Lehman, usually mild-mannered, took the bait. He publicly blasted Sabatini's remarks as clueless. He admonished Sabatini for speaking on matters he knew little about. He questioned Sabatini's
etiquette on and off the course. It was rare to see Lehman feud with a player outside the Ryder Cup context, but Sabatini's attitude struck a nerve. Lehman saw it as an affront to his leadership and to the honor of the US team. Their exchange was brief but heated in press quotes. It highlighted Lehman's intolerance for players disrespecting the traditions of team golf. Sabatini, for his part, was no stranger to controversy. His brash mouth had earned rebukes from many peers, not just Lehman. But for Lehman, this was personal. Someone had questioned his captaincy, and he couldn't let it slide. The final name on Lehman's list might be the most bitter of all, Paul Casey of England. This feud wasn't born from an on-course incident. It came from explosive comments Casey made in 2004. In a UK interview ahead of that year's Ryder Cup, Casey said he had learned to properly hate Americans during Ryder Cups. He derided US fans as ignorant and annoying. The comments caused an uproar across the Atlantic. But what truly enraged Lehman was that Casey singled him out personally. Casey questioned whether Tom Lehman, the newly named 2006 US captain, embodied the spirit of sportsmanship that the Ryder Cup deserves. That was a pointed reference to Lehman's behavior at Brookline. Casey was implying Lehman wasn't sportsmanlike enough to lead Team USA. Lehman was furious at this personal jab. By all accounts, he viewed Casey's remarks as beyond the pale. His friends noted how deeply it stung to have his integrity challenged. Casey later tried to clarify his words. Teammate Luke Donald even defended Lehman as a gentleman on the course, but the damage was done. For Lehman, a proud sportsman who'd spent years trying to rebuild his image after Brookline, Casey's hate tirade cut the deepest. The attack on Lehman's character made Casey an enemy. It's no surprise that Lehman hates Casey back. Their relationship remains cool to this day. It shows how a moment of intemperate language can create a lasting rift in golf. Looking at all 6 feuds together, a pattern emerges. Tom Lehman became a lightning rod after 1999. A devout, normally amiable man turned into someone who earned the scorn of European legends who felt he crossed a line of decorum. He bristled at colleagues who he thought disrespected him or his team. He was quick to defend his honor when he felt slandered. But in every case, the core issue was the same. Pride, image, a refusal to fully back down. Lehman could never quite bring himself to say, "I was wrong at Brookline." Instead, he defended his patriotic zeal, attacked his critics, and tried to flip the narrative. The feuds damaged more than friendships. They damaged Lehman's leadership reputation. They turned him from a respected Open champion into a controversial figure. They made him radioactive in Ryder Cup circles for years. Curtis Strange wouldn't pick him because he was a liability. Europeans wouldn't forgive him because he wouldn't fully apologize. Players like Casey and Sabatini felt comfortable attacking him because his image as a man of God didn't match his actions. Every feud tied back to that one moment on the 17th green at Brookline, when Tom Lehman chose celebration over respect. Despite all the negativity, Lehman believed he was defending something important: honor. The American spirit in competition. He saw the Europeans as hypocrites who complained too much. He saw Strange as a coward who abandoned a loyal soldier. He saw Sabatini and Casey as disrespectful punks who didn't understand team golf. In Lehman's mind, he wasn't the villain.
He was the one person willing to stand up for what mattered. That's the tragedy of Tom Lehman's legacy. He had the talent, the faith, and the leadership skills to be remembered as one of golf's great ambassadors. Instead, he'll always be remembered for one celebration that went too far, and the 6 feuds that followed. At 66, Tom Lehman reflects on these conflicts without shying away from them. They're part of his story now. A reminder that even golf's man of God can harbor grudges when competitive passions run hot. The feuds revealed the complexity of his character, the pride that wouldn't bend, the stubbornness that protected his ego, but also the passion that made him a fierce competitor and a loyal captain. These 6 golfers represent 6 different ways that Lehman's principles clashed with the golf world's expectations. And in the end, Lehman chose to be true to himself, even if it meant being hated. Which feud shocked you the most? Was it the Brookline celebration that started it all, or one of the other bitter rivalries? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you want more untold stories from golf history, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an upload.